there any French media here? We just have to try to keep our time as quick because 10:30 is question period. We're going. It's already. All right. Good morning. Thank you, everyone, very much for coming today. Yet again, we are here to talk about this Ford government's failure to deliver an autism program that meets the needs of thousands of families here in Ontario. They're here to demand an end to the cuts and delays and the chaos that this government is causing for children across the province. It's worth pointing out how we got here today. We had an Ontario Autism Program, for sure, that was broken. Instead of fixing it, the Ford government decided to take a sledgehammer to it. They listened to no one, and they bullied stakeholders and experts. They cut the funding each family was to receive, and they wanted to means test it to reduce that funding even further. This announcement had a ripple effect that the Ford government should have seen coming. Therapy providers were forced to shut their doors and lay off staff. The entire system was in jeopardy. When Todd Smith took over, he promised a needs-based program by April 2020. When he made his announcement in December, he pushed that date back yet another year to 2021. Breaking his promise and crushing the hopes of families yet again. All of this was unnecessary. All of this turmoil could have been avoided if the government was more concerned with helping families instead of their budget line. As it stands now, little has changed for families. In practice, Lisa McLeod's program is still in place. Childhood budgets have been renamed interim funding, and thousands of families are still waiting. Today, these advocates and parents are here to say that they are not okay. Life is getting harder and harder, and they cannot wait another year. To share more about the state of the autism program and the impact that it's having on families, we have parents who are turned into activists, Laura Kirby-McIntosh, Scott Corbett, and Talitha LeBlanc. We'll start with Laura.
So good morning, everyone, and thanks for being with us. I'm here today to express my deep concern over recent developments in the Ontario Autism Program and the devastating impact that these changes have had on families and service providers in this province. As many of you know, I come to this issue from a variety of different perspectives. I'm the mother of 2 autistics, I'm the president of the OAC, I'm a teacher, and I'm a member of the former Autism Advisory Panel. No matter which lens I use, though, what I see is the same. Autism families in Ontario are still in crisis, and I'm literally going gray, waiting for that to change. Doug Ford a rompu sa promesse faite au cours de la dernière campagne électorale, soit d'appuyer les familles touchées par l'autisme à 1000%. Au contraire, son gouvernement a fait d'énormes coupes dans le financement individuel offert par le Programme ontarien des services en matière d'autisme, dans le cadre d'un programme désastreux à taille unique, annoncé en février 2019. Cette annonce a mené à plusieurs manifestations partout en Ontario. Le ministre Todd Smith, nommé en juin après la rétrogradation de la précédente ministre, est revenu sur sa promesse de mettre en place un nouveau programme fondé sur des besoins d'ici avril 2020. Les familles attendront désormais 1 année de plus pour des services de base. So we're back at Queen's Park today to tell the Premier that we are not okay. Very little has changed since last year. Age cutoffs and funding caps are still in place, and needs-based therapy is still not available to tens of thousands of autistic children in Ontario. Some autism services are contemplating whether or not they can remain open at all due to the uncertainty around funding. In October 2019, the Autism Advisory Panel released a recommendations report for a new Ontario Autism Program. We designed a needs-based therapy program for the government and told them how to do it on budget. It's all done. It's there. All they have to do is implement it. Unfortunately, several things have happened that are causing high levels of anxiety in our community and concern among some of my fellow panelists as well. We never wanted to see the continuation of childhood budgets. We wanted to see a seamless transition into needs-based therapy. Today, families are still being sent flat-rate checks based on age. And the ministry keeps moving ahead with sole-sourced contracts for early intervention and e-learning modules for parents instead of the therapy that we fought for the last year. To me, the worst thing is the needless delays. Throughout the summer and fall of 2019, the minister, his chief, and staff from his ministry all said that April 2020 was a totally realistic deadline for our new plan. We understood that not all kids would start immediately on April 1st, but we were assured that the deadline was realistic. Families whose lives had been turned upside down by the McLeod Plan 1 year ago were holding on to that promise of April 2020 for dear life, hoping that it would mean at least the beginning of access to the needs-based therapy we'd been fighting for so relentlessly. When Todd Smith announced in this room 5 days before Christmas that families will now have to wait until 2021, it should have come as no surprise that families in the media studio immediately burst into tears. Instead of announcing that core services would be available as promised, he announced yet another delay and brought forward his interim plan. At that same press conference, MPP Jeremy Roberts said that receiving a $5,000 check was, quote, better than nothing. Although it may have just been an unfortunate choice of words on his part, his comment was seen as a slap in the face to families who are watching their children lose precious months and now years in their child's development, time that they will never be able to get back. That's what's so hard to take. While the government asks families to be patient, some of our most vulnerable children are going to lose another precious year of learning opportunities. I can't emphasize enough how wrong that is. As a society, we should be doing everything we can to help children with disabilities. Leaving them behind like this, it's unconscionable. In a few short years, these same children, those who were unable to access the service that they need, will head into our school system. And sooner than we think, they will grow into adults, and they'll need housing and jobs and communities that understand and support them. We need them to get the help that they need now so that they will lead easier lives tomorrow. The minister keeps saying, these things take time and we want to get it right. To be blunt, I call BS. If this government can find millions of dollars virtually overnight to bribe 500,000 parents with their own money during a teacher's strike, then there is no doubt in my mind that after 2 years in office, they could have put together a better plan for 40,000 kids with autism. This isn't a matter of time, of needing more time or money. It's a matter of conscience. This government simply doesn't care about kids with autism. If they did, they would have done something more about it. All that's needed to move a plan forward is leadership, compassion, and political will. Outside today at our rally, you'll hear from parents of young children, parents of adults in crisis, autistic self-advocates, siblings, service providers, politicians, labor leaders, the former child advocate who's just joined us, and families from the North. We are all united in our message to Minister Smith and Premier Ford. Stop with the delays and give youth with autism access to the therapy that they need now. Make ABA, speech and occupational therapy, available to families in April like you promised. We're not okay, and we can't wait until 2021 for you to clean up the mess that you made. I'm going to turn things over now to Scott Corbett, who's going to talk a little bit about the wasteful spending of this interim plan.
Thank you, Laura. So I'm here today to speak about the financial implications of the forward autism policy, and also as a proud father of 2 boys who happen to be on the autism spectrum, one who is receiving service and another who has been on the wait list for 2.5 years. The Ford government is dragging their feet by announcing yet another Ontario Autism Program delay that is costing parents and children by not providing timely therapy and is squandering taxpayer dollars with their wasteful interim plan. To be clear, the Ford government had one job to do. They needed to move children off of the wait list and into needs-based services on or before April 2020. That was the promise of Minister Smith. They have failed big time. Instead, they've kicked the can down the road until sometime until 2021. The delays mean the Ford government will have denied thousands of autistic children needs-based therapy for an entire 2 fiscal years, on top of the time they've already waited on the wait list. So this got me wondering, given that the budget is now $600 million, and we're going to be going over 2 fiscal years until they have a program in place, how are they spending this money? With $1.2 billion on the line, the findings were alarming. To assess the spend, we estimated the costs across the 3 cohorts the Ford government has created. We have the Ontario Autism Program legacy children. We have the childhood budget children who are also eligible for a one-time renewal after the 1 year. And then Todd Smith has created one-time payment children that they'll get one payment based upon their age. So based upon the breakdown of the 2018-19 budget, we know that the therapy costs for the legacy children was $226 million. Put that over 2 fiscal years, that brings us to $453 million. To determine the average cost of the childhood budget and one-time payments, we use waitlist statistics that show 31% of the children are under age 6, with the remaining 69% age 6 to 17, which rolls into an average of about a $10,000 childhood budget. Therefore, the estimated cost for the childhood budget children with the one renewal will be about $101 million over the 2 fiscal years. And the estimated cost for giving nearly 24,000 one-time payment waitlist children is $245 million. Collectively, across these 3 groups, we're estimating over the 2 fiscal years, the government will spend $800 million on therapy, childhood budgets, one-time payments over the 2 fiscals. But remember, there's $1.2 billion across those 2. So where is the other $400 million being spent? We simply do not know. Yes, we know there are administrative costs. However, nothing close to $400 million. And think about it, $400 million, that's more than the entire Ontario autism budget was back in 2018-19. It was only $321 million. What are they doing with that money, or are they going to spend it? That's the question. So, beyond the budget mysteries, the plan to continue to dole out checks based on a child's age rather than need fails children on the spectrum and taxpayers. And I'm going to have Angela come up here to introduce you to a couple of scenarios that we want to display here. So we have Wendy, who is age 4 on the autism spectrum. Wendy has lower needs, and she requires $10,000 a year in ABA therapy. However, Wendy has received a childhood budget of $20,000, leaving the family an additional $10,000 to spend on what they may want to spend it on, not needs, wants. So with the surplus, the family decided with the $10,000, they buy her an extra iPad and send Wendy to summer camp. Can we show the David? David is also 4 years old, has autism, speech and language delay, and an eating disorder. He requires $60,000 a year in applied behavioral analysis, $18,000 in speech, $18,000 in occupational therapy, but only has a childhood budget of $20,000. There's $76,000 in needs, not wants, in needs therapy that David is not getting. So instead, David's family goes into massive debt and is destitute. This is what can happen when funding decisions are put in the hands of parents rather than having professionals consider the needs of children. It's a terrible way to allocate taxpayer dollars, as it amounts to pure waste in the scenario where you're left with money to spend on wants rather than needs. To be clear, the hairs on every fiscal conservative's arm should be standing straight up when learning that the Ford government has created an autism scheme that will lead to taxpayer waste. The Ford autism policy not only is a mess that fails to meet the needs of children, but their approach to changing the program also defies common sense. This really makes no sense what they're doing. You see, the government did the hard part. They increased the autism budget. The easy part should have been enrolling children in to an existing program, a program that could have been tweaked to add additional services that the autism panel had advised on. That's what any reasonable business would do if they had a program there and they needed to make some changes to it. Would you scrap the whole thing and delay and not provide the services that children need, or would you tweak it? So why is a pro-business government chosen to play politics with children and families with autism instead? I strongly urge Minister Smith to reconsider his policy and start providing waitlist children needs-based therapy now by improving on the old program and iteratively adding in the recommendations of the Autism Advisory Panel over time. Thank you. Now we're going to hand things over to Talitha LeBlanc.
In Ontario, children with autism have been divided into the haves and the have-nots. This reality exists in my own home. I have 2 children, Orion and Amara. They both have profound needs, requiring more than 20 hours per week of intensive therapy. They both require direct supports at all times. Both are flight risks. Both struggle to communicate and to regulate. Both have sensory challenges and need support with personal care. Both of my children have unique needs, even from one another. But as different as they are, both require intensive therapy. I have one child who is able to access an early diagnosis and begin a needs-based therapy program relatively quickly by today's standards. He has been benefiting from individualized care for 3.5 years. My daughter was diagnosed the week my son was called up for therapy. Whereas he has been receiving healthcare, education, services, and supports that meet his needs, my daughter has waited. My family has been chasing a finish line for more than half of my daughter's life. We have been so close, or at least thought we were. Having that taken away from you when it is the only thing you have focused on for years is gutting. For families who are already faced with additional challenges day in and day out, families who are in a state of crisis, families who are literally desperate for help, to have relief dangled in front of you, only to have it pulled away again and again, is emotionally torturous. I would not wish the way we have felt for 3.5 years on anyone. We were promised repeatedly upon entering the OAP waitlist that it would be a 2-year wait. My family cut corners. We worked multiple jobs, took out loans, emptied savings accounts, borrowed from the bank and family, racking up a mountain of debt so high we may never overcome it. We did this in an effort to give our daughter as much early intervention as we could during the 2 years she would be waiting to enter the OAP, hopefully to receive needs-based therapy like her brother. We willingly chose to make the necessary sacrifices so that Amara could access the therapy she needed. We did this because we knew that we were on our own. But we believed that if we could somehow make it through, relief would be waiting for us at the end of those 2 years. In the spring of 2018, after a 1.5 years on the wait list, we could see the finish line that we had so desperately been chasing. We met other families in the same situation, waiting, still waiting. We all had our children's numbers. We called regularly to check up on their positions on the list in eager anticipation. We knew that we just had to stretch out just a little further and then help would arrive, but help never came. In September of 2018, the numbers stopped moving. We had anticipated that by Christmas, we'd be called up for service. The call never came. What was worse was that no one had answers. We were completely in the dark, crippled by debt, frustrated, desperate, scared. We were so close. We didn't want to let ourselves believe that the government would purposely shut children out of a program that was right there in front of us. A program that children like my own son was already benefiting from. Lisa McLeod's announcement on February 6, 2019 changed everything for the worse. Everything we had been waiting for was gone. The floor fell out from beneath us. She stood at a podium and communicated that children like my daughter didn't matter. That 23,000 other children in Ontario didn't matter. Doug Ford reduced our children to numbers, to the bottom line on a budget. all of our hope was obliterated. We were shattered. Despite our best efforts to provide our daughter with only some of the necessary intervention that she needed, we were acutely aware that we would never be able to personally provide her with the level of help that she actually required. And it was clear that the government wasn't going to either. My daughter's therapy, like others with profound needs, costs upwards of $85,000 a year. What family could ever provide that? Knowing that help exists, seeing its benefits in my own son, yet never being able to access the same for my daughter, has been devastating. This has left us feeling demoralized, ignored, dehumanized. Politicians have claimed responsibility over my child's healthcare and education, and for this, I have no more tears left to shed. For this, with an aching heart for my child, I am filled with contempt and anger for the way this government has handled this file, for the way this government has deemed my child unworthy, undeserving, for the way they have refused to invest in my daughter's endless potential as a meaningful contributing member of society if she could only get the supports she needed to learn and grow. After 2.5 years, Amara received a childhood budget. Fractured, piecemeal funding intended to purchase therapies. Therapy that my family was only able to access because we'd already secured a placement privately. Had we not taken on astronomical debt to provide our daughter with something while she waited, she'd likely still be waiting. Like thousands of others in our province, receiving childhood budgets and one-time payments with no guidance and no options and no chance of accessing a meaningful therapeutic program. Amara's budget lasted 5 months at partial hours. It provided a moment of financial relief, but nothing more. Despite being given a label of in-service, we are back to paying for her therapy with the bank's money, and that money is quickly running out. It will not last while we continue to wait. Promises have been made, and they have been broken again and again. There is no way a family can adequately plan to brace the impact of more delays and more extensions. We have no reason to trust that Amara will be able to access needs-based therapy anytime soon, especially now that the target date has been changed again to sometime in 2021. There is a 2-tier standard of care for children with autism in Ontario, and it is absolutely unacceptable. Every single child in this province should have access to the supports and services that they require based on their individual and clinically assessed needs. This should not be reserved for 25% of the children requiring services, while a year later, 75% of children are still faced with barriers to access meaningful therapy. Orion was in full-time, needs-based therapy at the age of 4. Amara is now 5.5 years old, diagnosed at 2 years old. She has now waited 3.5 years for service, more than half of her young life, for help. If core services are not delivered until April 2021, she will have waited 4.5 years for the same opportunity her brother has. As a mother of 2 beautiful children, I am haunted by this reality each and every day, as I know thousands of other parents are. We are a freeze-gate family. We have waited nearly 3 years for piecemeal funding. Our daughter has never been able to get the therapy she needs, despite our best efforts to provide it for her. And the time we have lost, the time Amara has lost, is something that we and she will never, ever get back. Thank you.
So there you have it. This is the lay of the land in Ontario for autism families. These families are not alone. There are thousands of families that are tortured by the current system of this government. Todd Smith says that he's putting a plan in place, that he's listened to the expert panel. All of that is for nothing if we don't ensure that kids are getting services when they need it. Amara received 5 months of service. What is going to happen to the next how many months before she gets money again? That's money wasted once again because of the regression. If they don't continue in the services, then all of that service just falls off. This is unfair. It's not right. We need this government to act now and get it together before more families continue to just fall through the cracks here in Ontario. We're open for questions.
In your calculations, do you have any sense of how many kids are getting way too much money and how much money is being wasted that could go to young children like Amara instead?
It's extremely difficult to ascertain what that might be because the money that's being doled out is arbitrary based upon age and not clinically assessed. But we know that there are kids that are getting $20,000 and they just don't need that.
Just to put it in context, I mean, the first thing I want to say is that I'm shocked to hear Talitha say that Amara is going to be waiting for 4.5 years, because that's how long our son waited, and he's now 20. So, that guts me to know that there's been no progress. But the other thing is, I mean, technically, my daughter, who's sitting behind you, is 17 and on the spectrum, and could be eligible for a $5,000 check. No questions asked. She's got a diagnosis. Does she need it? I mean, I'm sure she'd love to go to camp. I'm sure she'd love another iPad. But it's not right that, that they'll give it to her, no questions asked. And yet somewhere out there's a family that really needs it.
Laura, do you have a breakdown of how many children need $80,000-$85,000 a year versus children who are lower on the spectrum or on the other side of the spectrum who need $5,000 or $10,000 a year? Are there any numbers?
The only numbers really that we can use, and we looked at these numbers when we were at the advisory panel, are actually stats from Hawaii that looked at diagnosis rates and sort of categorized them based on severity. And I'm going to ask Angela to help me with these numbers, but I think those at the severe end. Do you remember where they were? They were about a quarter.
Yeah. About 25.
A
Right.
quarter, and then another
level
25
two,
moderate.
Yeah, and then, right.
So are you saying maybe then around 50% of kids are getting too much?
It's possible. I'd want to look at the numbers a little bit more carefully before classifying that. But that's the injustice of this system, is that we don't have numbers on severity right now. The ministry doesn't collect them, so there's a data problem to begin with. So how are they designing a program without the data that they need to decide whether the checks that they're sending out are fiscally responsible? It's very unconservative to me. I think if they actually went back to a system based on need, they wouldn't need to spend as much money. My other concern, though, is that in the $600 million that they've budgeted for this year, I see a lot of money going out the door so far to sole-sourced contracts to groups like Hannon that provide speech therapy, and they're providing online training modules for parents. What, more e-learning? Like, there's no world in which that's what we protested for. I mean, I'm not saying it's completely worthless, but that's not therapy. And I don't yet know the value of that contract, right? And they're spending money on parts of the program that at panel we sort of classified as nice to have later on. Like, we'd love to have early intervention someday, but they're rolling that stuff out first, and they're funneling a whole bunch of money to the regional service providers to provide that. But money for therapy, which is what we need, is still it's off in the distance at some point in 2021.
Last time you or anyone in your community has actually met with the minister? I know you kind of said that they went dark in December.
They did, yeah. They went dark in December or so. I haven't met with the minister personally since the summer. I'd love to. I was in communication with his chief and with members of his staff, but they shut down in December. And
has there been any level of engagement?
No, none.
And so what does that kind of say to you,
That
current state?
That tells me that they've gone inside the bunker, which is a very dangerous thing for governments to do. They're not listening to stakeholders anymore. They're doubling down on this policy, and they're just going ahead with the plan as they see it. I'm very concerned about that, and I want to emphasize today, I would much rather be inside this building or inside the ministry office talking to the minister and talking to his staff than standing out on the lawn again in the cold. I want to engage in dialogue, but it seems that this is the only way to get their attention.
Just on that, can you talk about the significance of being here on the first day that the legislature resumes since December. Why did you choose today to spread this message?
We've been here every day of the entire last session also, right? So this is just truly a continuation of the hard work that families have been doing to try to get this government's attention. I think it's a very clear message that we're back, we're not going away, we want services for our kids.
Yeah. We are relentless. We need to be here for a question period. This was our first opportunity after the December 17th announcement to come back to Queen's Park. And so we're here and we're going to make some noise.
Do you plan on being in the gallery just as you were, as Monique mentioned?
Well, you've seen some families head out. That's exactly where they're going. What's interesting about the families that are coming to question period is that that's not an organized, coordinated thing by the Ontario Autism Coalition. It's quite spontaneous. Some people are affiliated with our organization, some people aren't. But these are families that are forcing the government to look them in the face every day and be that reminder that we're still here and we're not okay and we're still waiting. And I admire their tenacity and their persistence. They are the very embodiment of relentless.
Laura, you mentioned obviously core services is something that you'd like to see kind of roll out ASAP. But if there is, if the government is sticking with its potential timeline of working on that throughout this year, as you mentioned, they've rolled out the online courses, or they are doing that this month. In the interim, what's kind of the next logical step or service for them to roll out? Is it some kind of other early intervention or crisis supports? If it's not core services, what's the next?
To me, there is no other option. What families have been protesting for the last year is core services, period. Everything else is nice to have stuff. Look, we spent months designing the program at Panel. I'm emotionally attached to all of the different components, but I don't know why, but I just kind of thought it was obvious that the first part that should be rolled out was the therapy, right? Nobody here was protesting for online training modules. We were protesting for ABA, for speech therapy, for occupational therapy, and mental health supports are now part of core services as well. All of those things are what our families need, and it's urgent. They need them now.
What about the crisis supports that we talked about?
Well, by not introducing core services, everyone's in crisis. So if they introduce that first, everybody would just apply for crisis. It makes no sense. I know MPP Taylor has to go to question period. I'm happy to stay if you've got more questions, but I know you've got to go.
I do.
Okay.
And thank you so much for coming. Also remember that the longer that they hold off waiting for core services is the worse capacity continues to get also.
Yes.
Right? We're literally losing providers by the day because they can't stay in a world where they have no stability either. So thank you. I do have to run to question period.
Great. Can you get it okay?
Yeah.
All right. Sorry, guys.
Good job.
Thank you.
So you had mentioned in your breakdown a total of 1.2 billion. What is that in reference to?
So it was in reference to the budget over 2 fiscal years. So the budget is $600 million annually. So 1.2 billion over the 2 fiscals. The reason 2 fiscals is relevant is that this government has frozen the program as of this current fiscal year, and it's likely frozen all the way until next fiscal year because they're saying sometime in 2021 is when they will allow children into needs-based therapy.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Talitha, can we just get the spelling of your name?
Talitha.
Your last
LeBlanc, LeBlanc.
Capital B?
Capital B, yes, please.
And
Thank
sorry,
you.
your kids were, I know you said Amara is 5 years old?
Amara's 5.5.
And
Yeah.
how old is your
And
son?
Orion is 7.
Thanks.
We also do have some media kits for you on the way out with everything you could want and and then some. I think this is really worth taking a look at. We've got the most updated waitlist numbers, and then we have the corrected waitlist numbers. Take a look at the difference between them in terms of, like, one of the things that drives me crazy with the ministry is that they keep counting those that are receiving childhood budgets as being in service. And they are so not in service. They're receiving a check that probably doesn't meet the need. And so the corrected numbers really tell the tale. Yeah, yep, absolutely.
Great.
All right, thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Nailed it.